And we're live. Just make a sound. Just make a sound, and eventually it'll go live.
Technique.
It is the Dice casting. Oh my goodness me. Have I ever told you my cool space joke?
No.
Okay. You know Orion's belt?
Oh Jesus, yeah.
Waste of space. I know, right? It's only a 3-star joke. Dear.
My misery today is that I'm house sitting for a friend's mother in this lovely house, and I got here, which is quite far away from my house, to realize that only one of the bits of my headphones had the fucking fuzzy thing attached. This one doesn't have one.
No,
and I only have one earphone, which is basically like a hellscape that I live in, you know?
Yep.
See, and I usually listen just with one anyways, because I like to be aware of my surroundings.
Ugh.
Sometimes I do that, but it is strange. It's like when someone...
makes me feel like a teenager. Teenagers do that. You're talking to them and they have a fucking earphone in and you're like, what are you doing?
There were some kids
to the conversation, you know?
When I was at school, there would be kids that would wear their headphones, like one headphone down their sleeves, so they could like be like that at the desk and be writing. Oh, it was so cool. But then I thought, what happens if you move your arm? Then you're just going to keep bad times. Bad times.
Another thing, the coffee maker that we have here in this house is very effective, but also the gap between where the coffee comes out and where the cup stands is so small that none of the mugs fit. So I have to use a small glass to drink coffee. You know, it's like it never ends.
It is like heresy drinking a hot beverage from a glass.
Yeah, because you have to wait. You can't pick the fucking glass up.
No, you can't. And also, it's weird. It's weird seeing like a block of tea.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? A cup of tea, and then it's like a block of tea, and it's like, that's weird.
I mean, to be fair, glass is still an insulator, thermally speaking. Not as good as most ceramics, but. You brought an engineer on. You had to know.
You got to put your glasses on and then adjust them when you say things like that. You know,
you have to be like that.
Yeah,
I left my glasses in my car.
Mine is just a facade. I don't have the intelligence to go with it. I just sort of like sometimes I can wiggle them for comic effect, but like it doesn't really like, it's all a bit 1950s really. Anyway, for that we shall put an end to such a strange conversation and say hello, ladies and gentlemen, orcs and goblins, and welcome to the Dice Cast Holiday Special, which I forgot to put in the title. Will I remember to change it? Probably not. As ever, I am joined by my faithful comrade in arms, Lloyd Collins. Say hi, Lloyd Collins.
Hi, Lloyd Collins.
And he did the joke. He did the fabled joke that always happens.
Yeah,
absolutely. And we are very lucky to be joined by our special guest, Taylor Jeffrey. Say hey, Taylor Jeffrey.
Hello.
Non-conformity will not be tolerated on the Dice Cast. God damn it! So we're gonna have a wee chat about games like we usually do. But first, over to our fabled section. How are you? Starting with you, Lloyd.
Wow, we're really dialing up the hosting today.
Because it's the Christmas special, you got to ham it up.
Holiday special, Taylor. Holiday special.
Oh, I'm sorry, the holiday special.
Yep. Some of us don't celebrate Christmas, like me. It's not
That's
true.
okay. I have it on good authority that you still eat all the chocolate out of the advent calendar.
That's true, yeah. And I mean, I celebrate all the parts of Christmas that involve me getting presents and things like that, you know.
Absolutely.
Just not the part that involves it being Jesus' birthday. I'm well. Yep. House sitting, which is nice. It's quiet. There are 2 cats who have this like habit of sneaking up behind you and like putting a paw on you when you're deeply engaged in something, which frequently frightens me. And the other night, I was sitting downstairs in the kitchen, literally sitting, working, and then the next morning at like 8 o'clock in the morning, the guy from downstairs like banged on the door, and was like, "You've been incredibly loud and kept us up all night." And I was like, "I didn't do anything. I've just been sitting in a chair and typing. Sorry." And he was like, "It's fucking ridiculous. I'm going to call the-" Well, I mean, I didn't do anything. He's like, "I'm going to call the police." I'm like, "Okay, call them." Like, I really don't really see what's happened here. Like, obviously, I wasn't trying to upset you. It was very intense. So that's how I am.
What actually? Do you have any idea of what it was that was causing the sound?
I guess the floor was pegged in. Like, it's not like I was stomping around. Like, occasionally, I would, like, but really, it was not loud.
Hello.
Hello?
You went super roboto, man, and then you stopped. Are you still there?
Yes.
Hey.
I am using my phone's internet, so
borrowed internet and borrowed time. Yeah, I heard floorboards, and then you went crazy.
Basically, the guy downstairs is a dickhead.
Sure. Okay. Taylor, how are you? How was your holiday?
It's wonderful. I'm sitting in a giant oversized recliner holding a beer, so I'm doing great.
Yes, beer. Excellent. Now's the time when you have to ask me how I am.
How are you, Rob?
I'm glad you asked. Thank you. So it's been crazy. I have had a very, very short break in which I've had to learn a tremendous amount of lines and also move house. I'm in a different location now. I'm in my new house and it's very nice. There's space over here and there's a bit of space over there, and I have a bathroom over here. It's really great.
Thanks for the
That's
tour.
not all the house has. I'm just saying the rough vicinity. Yeah, and it was good. It was relaxing, but not enough. I need more time, and I don't have more time. That's it.
It's the human condition, you know. All there is.
I'm sure Lloyd wants more time for his cleft.
I would love more time.
Oh my goodness. Yep. Yes, like a ticking clock, ever beating, ever ticking. That's what I just said. So what we're going to do now is this is going to be a slightly different episode of the Dyers Cast, because, and I've mentioned this on a live stream a live stream I did on the Facebook Absolute Tabletop Facebook group. If you're not part of it, go and join it. On a live stream, I mentioned that I haven't been playing many games because I've been on tour in a number of productions, theatre productions, and I've been getting a lot of gaming withdrawal. So because of this, when I've been in the back of a van driving from one part of the country to the other to do a different show, I've just been thinking of lots and lots of different ideas. And I've been starting to formulate what I believe to be quite an original setting. However, a minute before this broadcast began, I was reliably informed that not only is the name of my setting already taken by a fantasy series, there is also a role-playing game that is similarly named and similar in concept. I'm not going to go into those right now, but rest assured, dear viewer, if you think this sounds familiar, you're probably right. Outside, created in a vacuum, hopefully it'll be slightly different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through it, and I'm hopefully going to get some feedback from my advisors, my RPG advisors, who I trust immensely, and I also trust them to be.
That's a huge mistake, by the way. You should not trust us.
Well, you know, trust is like it's a malleable word. I trust you with some things. Like, I trust you with a kitten, but I wouldn't trust you with a flamethrower.
That's fair.
That's why.
It's fair, right? So I don't know. We've not really ever done an episode like this before. So shall I just go? Shall I just go for it?
Yeah, I think just go.
Okay. So this setting is called GODGRAVE, and it's a setting that has been inspired by a number of things, primarily influences on my gaming life already, such as, let me see. Dark Souls is a big sort of influence, I'd say. What else? Although I've never played it, Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Only I've based off what I've heard about that game, having never played it, I can only say so much. But anyway, This is Godgrave, and this is my setting that we're going to be talking about. So, a bleak and beautiful world is suffering in the aftermath of a spiritual apocalypse. In the absence of the gods, a fallen theocracy is now being carved up by those that seek power and position. Where once the lands were ruled by those with God-given right, with no gods, there is no longer any right. Thus, conflict and chaos is born anew, and the world is divided by those who hope or deny, those who believe the gods are lost, and those who think them dead and gone forever. So I really like the idea of the fact that if you looked at medieval kingdoms, it's all based on a system of belief, faith, and control. And the presence of God being there is the thing that keeps that stable. And I kind of wondered in fantasy settings where it is absolutely a given that the gods exist because their power is evident, channeled through, clerics and paladins and the like. Because there is proof of that, when the gods are gone, it's absolutely a fact that, oh my God, we've been abandoned. We are lost. So that's something that I really wanted to explore. And that is where I began. Now, I'm beginning to wonder how we're going to make this a discussion without me reading the entirety of this document. Any thoughts?
I would just take a break every now and then.
Let's take a break now then. So, first of all, there's the fact that the gods have gone, I think is, I don't know, I kind of like the idea of the abandonment, and I kind of like the idea of people genuinely feeling the absence of gods within this fantasy world, because they would have known when they were there, and now they know when they're not there, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So was there like a cataclysmic event? Do people know why the gods have left? Or is it just this sudden realization that, oh shit, my cleric powers just don't work anymore?
Well, that's the thing. I haven't fully decided yet. There is a moment that I will talk about later, which is known as the revelation, when everyone discovered that they were gone. But the reason why they're gone, I've kind of been a bit hesitant to go into. I don't personally know myself why they've gone. The interesting thing to me is what happens to the world once they've gone, not the reason why they have been. So I haven't gone into that yet. Essentially, I just like the idea that there's this fantasy land that it was a known fact that the gods existed, and then they're taken away. And the central tension of the games are essentially going to be what happens with that void, that really devastating void that's left in the systems of belief and control. Lloyd, I messaged this, by the way, isn't new to either of these my two fine friends here. I have messaged them about this separately and kind of pitched this to them already. And Lloyd, you brought up something about what would happen to like medieval kingdoms and stuff without that framework, because there wouldn't be knights.
Yeah.
For example.
Well, like our Western European medieval society was very much based on divine right. So the king, and that's because God said this person is the king, and everything that follows from that is because there is a God. It's like very factual. And so if that's not the case, what's to stop powerful warlords from just killing the king? What's to stop knights just like murdering peasants and declaring war on each other and all this? Like, doesn't, because the fact that there's a God was like the thing that kept a lot of people polite and good. I mean, good in quotation marks, but kept them from doing like whatever they felt like doing because there was the promise of hell. And if that's not the case anymore, then you just have like this society that is very heavily armed with no moral imperative anymore.
There is no consequence to bad behavior, essentially, because there's
Yes,
no watching you
and no
anymore.
reward for good behavior. There's also no reward for good behavior, which I think cannot be underestimated how important that was for people, and maybe still is for lots of people. The idea that if you are good, you will get a reward. It's just like not the case now if there's no gods. And so like thinking about it, like if you play an RPG, like a computer RPG, it's always easier to be evil because you can steal and you can kill whoever you want and you can just do whatever you feel like. You're always very powerful. And so, like, if that's the case and you are a person of power, then nothing is stopping you from just butchering people and taking what you want.
Yeah, which is where I kind of got the idea of calling this like a spiritual apocalypse, because it isn't really a cataclysmic event. There aren't earthquakes, there aren't volcanoes erupting. It's literally people just realizing that there's no longer any kind of consequent, like spiritual consequences to bad actions. There's also that that shift, that power dynamic being sort of the fact that, you know, kings no longer have the right to be king because there is no god that, you know, bequeathed their presence to be there anymore, you know, like, so a big shift in the way that power operates in this typical fantasy world.
How do people know?
Well, this is it. This is it. I've come up with this term called the revelation, and I haven't fully decided how it was discovered, but that was where essentially it all kicked off. I'm thinking it's got something to do with this little idea I've been kicking around called the second sight, which is a gift bestowed upon people that can see the influence of the gods, whether that be on a magical item or that be on sacred ground or a favored soul, for instance. Like, they can see that there's been some kind of effect from a divine effect. And I think perhaps they had some kind of trace, these gifted individuals, this trace of seeing, you know, exactly where this power came from, hence being able to prove that gods existed at all. So I think that they could have turned around and said, "Oh shit, they're gone." But are they lying?
Right? If I'm a king, I would have very carefully, in my time as king, gathered all of those people who can see those things and like have them work for me. Various reasons. And then if it happens that the gods vanish and they're not there anymore, I would either kill all of those people or perpetuate the lie that they are still alive. Because as a king and all of the people who are with me, like, all of the power rests on the idea that there's a god. And if there is provable gods, you would think that like a clergy is very important as well, like it was in the Middle Ages. And if that's the case, and if you're a priest or a cardinal or a pope, and suddenly there's no god, you are going to do literally everything you can to change people's minds about that. You know, in a setting where they're like demonstrably were gods and now maybe aren't. I'm just thinking, like, if you know, if the people in power, they would just do everything they can to make sure that that lie remains a truth.
And the power might be resting, like, if you have clerics and paladins in your army and as protecting things, like that could be a big power shift if all of a sudden they're a third as good as they used to be.
Yes.
Less.
It's true.
Were there clerics and paladins? Are there?
Yes, I think there are, and I have an idea as to how they would operate. Because at first I thought, well, like Taylor mentioned before, oh my god, all these clerics and paladins, all their powers just stop working. I think that's quite a cool idea, but I also thought, well, I was actually speaking to Locris about this as well. Locris is someone else who I messaged about this. And Locris liked the idea of playing a paladin or a cleric in this world, which is essentially godless. I thought, well, how do we explain their powers being around still? Do you know what I mean? But we'll get onto that a bit later, because that's a bit that I have later on in the document. For now, in terms of how do they know? That's a very good point. As I said, this is still a work in progress, so I don't know yet. I don't know how word got out, because you're absolutely right. There would be people doing absolutely everything they could to ensure that this didn't get out. But maybe it didn't get out immediately. Maybe there was like a period of time known as the Great Deception or something, first name off the top of my head, where for a number of years they were able to maintain that they were still there, perhaps. But I don't know. This is why I said, like, everyone sort of felt it happen.
Jeff has pointed out in the chat that it wouldn't be super easy necessarily to gather everyone of a certain ability. And if you even have one or two like just like the yokel that lives up on the mountaintop and is kind of crazy, but like people trust him. You'll need a handful of those for some big idea to start spreading.
Yeah, but I don't know. This is the thing. Like, this is something that I'm gonna have to put careful thought into.
I mean, if it's the case that it was like revealed to everyone, like everyone who exists had like a spontaneous vision or something, or like they all woke up and like felt some severed connection or something, that would make it fine. But I think even if it is the case, have I gone robot-y? You're looking at me funny.
You did a bit. You did, but you're still here.
Okay. Even if it's the case that like it's clearly the case that God is now dead or doesn't exist anymore, I think even in the face of that, ruling class will ensure to tell lies to everyone and be like, that was just a glitch, don't worry, our priests say everything's fine, you know. Like if I'm the king, that's just like my first move is to be like, everything's fine, don't worry about it. Who's talking about this loudly? This guy and this guy? Okay, we execute those for heresy. You know.
So if I'm the king, part of my thing is, oh well, it's a test, and you guys must not have met the requirements. But these people here, who are conveniently my advisors, say that the gods are still there, just testing all the rest of you.
Yeah,
for sure.
So it has to probably be something more visible than that, like literally God falls out of the sky, or you know, or like everyone has the same vision of like, or feels a sense of disconnection, or because I think maybe it's just like my dystopian leanings, but I think like I don't know, I just find it tricky to believe that like a ruling class who's like so powerful, because that's what happened in our world, right? Like there's no proof of God at all, you know, but still for like literally all of time, there's been a ruling class that has like perpetuated that idea. So then like if there was a God literally and it was true, then you have millions of years to point back to being like, remember God, remember all those things and the miracles and stuff. And yeah, I don't know, have you ever read the War of the Spider Queen?
I have
where
not, no.
where Lolth goes silent all of a sudden and all the priestesses in Drow society can no longer cast spells.
Oh no, I haven't, but that sounds awesome.
So they go through this whole process of like trying to keep that quiet, because Drow society would just collapse if it was discovered, because it's all held in place by the priesthood and like their dominance and their power and stuff. And when they can't cast spells anymore, they're no longer very dangerous. But yeah, that's what I would think. You know, like there's no end, I think, that people wouldn't go to ensure that lie remains.
Sorry, Jenny,
Drop Dice in the chat has said an ideal to steal from Burning Wheel is faith in dead gods, and you're basically cannibalizing the corpse of a god for power.
Ah, that's a very cool idea, but obviously that would be stealing it entirely. I did have this one idea, which was essentially how it was a workaround as to how we could keep paladins and clerics in the game, is an idea known as the Well, and as a final blessing onto the earth, the gods are able to leave this power known as the Well, and it is a finite source of divine power, meaning that paladins and clerics can use their spells, but again, it's a finite resource. Eventually, it's going to run out. And I also wanted to state that the more it is used, the harder it gets to use, because there's like a spiritual cost. There's a quote from Dr. Faustus, played by Christopher Marlowe, in which Mephistopheles says, "Why, this is hell, nor am I out of it," meaning that because he is in a world without God, essentially that is hell to him. Without without his presence, you just feel it all the time, and you can't rest, you can't exist peacefully. There's just something that eats away at you. So I think that it's almost like feeling that embrace of the gods, but not quite getting it. So every time you're using that power, you're just reminded again and again of what you've lost. So you can use divine power, and the clerics and the paladins can exist and can still work in the game, but they're gonna find it really difficult. That was
There's
my
also
idea.
there's also an idea that exists in some things, which is like that the faith itself is enough to make. So, like the fact that there was a god for so long can mean that paladins and clerics just believe so strongly in what's going to happen that it does happen. There are some settings that do that.
Because I do have a similar idea. Again, this was created in a vacuum. Taylor, in fact, I'll just come clean and say it. Taylor said to me moments before we went live, "You are aware that there's a setting called God's Fall, right?" And I was like, "No, I wasn't aware that there was a setting called God's Fall." And then Lloyd was like, "You do realize that there's a fantasy book called God's Grave, don't you?" And I was like, "No, I didn't know that." But anyway, so there might be some ideas that are similar, but I'm not trying to like remake the wheel here. But no, one thing that and I'm just going to be all over the dock now, screw going in order. But essentially, my idea of the Seekers of the Sight, which is a faction which relies on that second sight that the Seekers of those are the second sight anyway. Names are all up in the air right now. But essentially, they're like the Crusaders of old, where before they would march to foreign lands to preach and to fight in the name of God. Now they're marching to find God. So it's almost like the faith to them has switched. They've been quite clever about it. Now their faith revolves around finding the gods rather than reveling in their glory, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I imagine there's missions now of figure out what happened and undo it.
Yeah. Yeah, which the ambiguity I quite like because it's kind of like a mystery and there's a fear that you could die never knowing, you know, which I think is pretty horrible.
If there was a god, was there also a hell and like the opposite stuff?
I haven't really gone too much into that, but I think that there was because I did a little bit of writing to do with when. And I don't think I have it in this doc. It's a thing that I posted into the group. I should have copied it over. But essentially, when it was revealed that the gods existed no more, people sought for faith and protection and belief elsewhere. So some turned to the power of the arcane. They turned to magic, which had been outlawed and gone for centuries, and now it's coming back. There were those that went off into the woods and essentially became druids and found solace in the wisdom of animals or spirits in the guise of animals and stuff. And then there are those that started talking to the shadows, and the shadows started talking back to them. And I think the shadows are probably the antithesis of the god power is well, it's not Satan, but it's going to be similar. I took a lot of influence from the film The Witch, however you want to say it, which I sent to Lloyd for Christmas last year. It's if you want like really, you know, they're talking to goats and stuff. I just love the idea.
So good. God, it's a great film.
It's just really, really sinister, and they're just talking. The goats speak and shit. Not spoilers.
The goats talk.
Well, sort of.
It's a great film. If you haven't seen it, Taylor, it's really worth watching.
I don't want to go into it because I want to spoil it. In that case, if you want to see some really cool magic in a film, go and watch The Witch.
I do, but scary movies scare me.
It's quite scary as well, actually. Like, it's sinister.
Yeah, it's not really a scary movie in the traditional sense. It's just like you watch it the whole time. You're just like, it's great.
Really unnerving. It's an unnerving film. But anyway, so yeah, there is that antithesis. I haven't really gone into it too much yet, but I imagine there's going to be something cropping up. But again, like I've kind of made the gods a kind of bit vague. A kind of, I guess they shouldn't be too vague because they were. The whole premise works on the fact that they were there. Do you know what I mean?
So here's a question from the chat that ties into this. In this framework, are you proposing that the existence of this deity was important to the fabric of reality, or was it just a nice thing to have around?
That's a really good question, actually. And I think because of, I think the existence of those gods might have held back the barriers of the other stuff because, like, again, I'm jumping all around the document again, but let me see if I can find it.
That's what happens when you have other people in here and you're not just reading it.
That's exactly
They're
it.
not going to let you go in order. There was no way.
No, and that's in a way it's a lot better. Let me see if I can find it quickly. Essentially, yeah, it was almost like there was a spiritual barrier created by these gods, and now that they are no longer there, it is much easier for dark powers and shadows to creep into the fabric of the world. So I think, although not completely stated as an absolute yes, that is a thing that is basically likely that that's a part of it. Again, I'm not dealing with too much certainty here, and I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. Do you know what I mean?
It's good.
Good.
I would say it's
Yeah.
good. But that's always been my thing. Just like you have enough of a framework now, I would say, to run it, and then the first like 5 games will like solidify a lot of it. You know.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, from this point, I think, yeah, look, I've got basically 3 pages of a Google Doc, and it's not full text; it's just bullet points and things, and just random scrawlings. But what I'm going to do is, because I'm aware we've been talking about this for quite a while, I'm just going to like basically go through the pillars, because as we always talk about, it's very important to have your pillars to try and keep your setting tied to a singular kind of ideal, or at least a few ideals.
Oh shoot! I should make pillars.
Pillars, we swear by them, and they tend to be really helpful, and they keep you close to the mark in terms of what you want to achieve with your setting. The pillars are for those who saw my post in the Absolute Tabletop group, there were 3 words on the post that I released, and they were silence, suffering, and superstition. I'm just going to blast through them really quickly, because it should hopefully give you a better idea as to what the games are going to be like that are going to be played in this setting. So silence. The greater world is a quiet place, but not a peaceful one. Menace and tension brews within the hearts and minds of all who dwell within the world. Open wilderness spells death to careless travelers that vanish in the night with near a soul to trace. Most of the land seems deserted. Whole settlements either moved in exodus or eerily disappeared. So I like menace, I like tension in my games. I think it's much more terrifying and atmospheric to have like that kind of game rather than have, I don't know, just evil appear all around you. Do you know what I mean? I think the greater evil is the one that you don't see or hear, if you understand that.
Certainly, yeah, I agree. I think it's much spookier that way.
It is spooky. In fact, silence could be replaced by spooky. Suffering. Now that the gods are... sorry, let me start that again. Now there are no gods to judge wicked deeds. Darkness grows unchecked. Those that were faithful are abandoned and now fall victim to a world quickly being seized by new forces and factions that vie for supremacy and survival. So survival is going to be very much at the forefront of this game, because civilization and its structure is kind of broken down. It is kind of like a dog-eat-dog world out there now. And suffering is obviously going to be at the forefront of that. And what people do because of that suffering is going to be something else that will be explored in the games. And then there's superstition, which is something that we were briefly talking about before, which is now that all that was believed has turned in falsehood, new and old beliefs bubble to the surface and grow strong within the hearts of the people. Stories of monsters and abominations spread like wildfire, adding to the dismay of this abandoned world. So not only are the gods gone and people are already feeling abandoned, now darkness and monsters and abominations, I guess, are kind of like are closing in on what remains of this civilization. So those are the 3 pillars, essentially. I talk about magic very briefly, where people have turned to the forbidden arts because there's no longer, the gods there to keep it in check or whatever, or there's no one in authority anymore to sort of hunt these people down. my idea for the gods, and this is something we should talk about because Taylor, you brought this up. My idea for the gods were that it's going to be a triumvirate, so there's going to be 3. But Taylor, you said that might walk too close to the mark in terms of Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Spirit. You know what I mean?
It's just something to be considerate of. Is people get very defensive, particularly around religion.
Boo! Fucking boo!
So stepping too close to that line is just something to be aware of.
Absolutely not. 3 is good, and it's good because it evokes real-world ideas.
Yeah, no, 3 is a good one. It just depends on how you do the 3.
That's right. It is a very obvious, as it was pointed out to me, very obvious kind of. It obviously evokes, Catholicism. I'm not trying to make a point by doing that, though. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of just like an easy shortcut for me.
Okay. Then maybe not. Like if I was going to do it, and I was going to use 3 gods that were one, I would like heavily lean into, because you've got like knightly orders, you've got like priests and divine right, and like all of that stuff already is medieval Europe.
Yeah,
not in a bad way, in an interesting way, I think. But then, like, if you should lean into that, then I think, and have monasteries and abbeys and priesthoods and things like that, or go in the direction of like, I don't know, Westeros has like 7 gods or like something like that, but still has the same feel. You've got, they're called septs, but they're just churches. You've got nuns and all the rest. Like, I think it's good to use that stuff because it's a shorthand and people don't have to like do a lot of like thinking about what the church looks like,
Right.
And you don't have to do a lot of thinking about it either.
Yeah,
it can be tricky when you're like, this is my setting, and here are the 800 gods involved, and here's what this temple looks like, and this is nobody gives a shit, Like you can keep it like clear and like relatable, I think, as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only difference is that I think I might not have them be one and the same, so they're not, 3 that are one. They might have actually been 3 separate entities.
That was more my thing. Like the 3 in 1 is very Trinitarian and very Christian. And it's not a bad thing. Lloyd, you're giving me that look. Like you could do a god that maybe has like 3 faces, and like some people worship each face. But the idea of 3 in 1 particularly is I'm not saying is, but could step on toes if it's not handled well.
Agreed. I like I don't know. It's something that I've got to think about. Like I've been very, very vague about the actual nature of the god so far. I guess I'm going to actually have to put some work in there. But again,
one of the things about if there was this divine right idea, it implies that there is one god who is more important than the rest, right? Who makes these mandates. So it probably works better if it's analogous to whatever we had in the Middle Ages, Catholicism, in whatever form it was back then, because that's how all that stuff happened. That's like it led to divine right, it led to priests, it led to knightly orders. All this stuff comes from the fact that there's one God and not many.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
I mean, that's really 3 gods, and whatever. It's complicated. It's really lots of gods, but at the end, there's got to be one, I think, who decides this person is king, and this is how you live your life, and this is all because that's how these societies form. Like monotheistic societies are pretty specific, in that like there's one correct way. Like it's not the same with polytheistic religions where you can pick the god that you want for the thing at hand, and So I think probably it's best if there is like one over god or a very important god.
See, this is why I'm really glad we're having this conversation. It's also, I'm glad that we can have these discussions that are very, very, what's the word? Not critical, because it sounds like you're being mean, but you know what I mean? Like this is exactly
the whole point of it, right?
Yeah, this is exactly what we need to work through. So this is good. Yeah, that's a very good point. I would have missed that as well. Oh, close one. We got questions, are we?
Friend of the show, Jeff Doty, asks.
Friend of the show.
If there are definitively gods, do people definitively have souls? If so, what happens to their souls now, factually or believed?
Yes. I reckon they do. I don't know. I haven't really I haven't looked into it that much.
There's usually with most faiths, there's a afterlife.
Or reincarnation. There's something that comes after, though.
Yep, something that forces you, but like encourages you in this life to do the things that they want you to do, right? So live by these commandments, follow these tenets, whatever it is, so that you can go and get born as something good again, or you can like go to heaven, or you can go to Valhalla, or you can go to get your soul weighed by the what's the name, Anubis, and go to the good place. Like all these things. There's always like an imperative to like do as you're told, so that you get to go to the good place after you die, as opposed to the very unpleasant place.
So I think that's probably a yes. And I think with them gone, that probably leaves anyone who dies in rather a horrible position, shall we say, which makes the reality of the situation even worse.
Okay, but like if there's magic, imagine a charlatan or someone saying like, "Oh, I died and I was brought back by a necromancer. Let me tell you what's on the other side now," and becoming a powerful leader in this whole secondary cult of the new like belief system, and this is what's really happening, whether or not it's true.
Yeah,
it opens up a whole world of.
It does. It really does. And it reminds me of another faction that I've made two rough ideas for factions that we'll get to at the very end. But that was a really good question, Jeff. Thank you very much. So yeah, the other thing that I wrote down was a thing called the revelation, which we kind of jumped to, which was essentially that's when people learn the truth. And I think, Lloyd, you're absolutely right. There needs to be a definitive moment where everyone had this dawning realization, and it was irrefutable that it was the case, because otherwise you're quite right. They would have done everything in their power to keep that secret.
Yeah, and I'm not even like a conspiracy theorist, but like I just, societies operate with power, and like the people in power keep things the way that they want because they are in power. So unless like there's a clear way that like every peasant got to see it, if your local priest, who is like the divinely appointed person, says, "Don't worry, everything's fine," you go, "Okay, well, God said so." Like that's how it worked in medieval society just forever. So like there needs to be a way that like all of these lay people got to see it or like experience it. Otherwise, they'll just take the word of the people who are in charge, like they've always done.
Now, this is where I think I might be able to salvage. I say salvage, like link it back into what I already have in terms of this setting, because the name GODGRAVE is given to a particular part of this world. GODGRAVE is actually a colossal mega city that is essentially the size, its walls basically encompasses the size of a small province. Okay, it's massive. It is a mega dungeon. It is a fortress city that lies at the very heart of the land. And it is said that is wherever what happened, it happened at what is now known as GODGRAVE. That's where the event happened that took the gods away.
But here's an important question.
Go.
How long ago did this happen? Where is your setting in relation to the revelation?
Another very good question. And I was thinking about this right before we started. I think probably less than 100 years. Because I think there still need to be some people that were aware of what it was like beforehand. Maybe. Or maybe...
So are there things that live to be 100? Like
less than 100 years. Sorry.
Okay.
So
I think living memory in the Middle Ages is probably like 50 to 70 years.
60.
Yeah.
Nobody lives to be 100 in the Middle Ages, not even kings.
Would it be better than if it wasn't in living memory? Because then people could be like, did it actually happen?
I think what happens is it advances. Like 100 years is a real long time for society to change. So I would say that depends how much like you want it to be like the old world. So 50 years is still a lot of time. Like I think 20 years after it happens, the world would be just like incredibly different. A year after, you know, so 100 years is probably enough time for the world to stabilize. You know, so it might be like if you want to have it in this like time of like, oh God, what's happening? Probably better to have it like it happened recently, you know, within like
like less
50
than
years.
5 years.
But
Like
that's the
within,
thing. I don't know whether, and this is again something that could be determined when it comes to running these games, like when we are, because although I do like the idea of playing almost in the immediacy of it happening, where people are like, "Holy fuck!" like losing their minds.
Yeah.
I also like the idea of like the acceptance of what has happened and realizing there's nothing they can do about it, and essentially the world is now on a ticking clock. Because there's nothing that can really be done to help them, or so most people think anyway.
It would not just be the case that warlords would just like begin to dominate, you know, people who have like
this is it. Yes.
just warlords, right? Like it would just be this like awful Barbie buddy who has soldiers, just like fucking murders people and takes their stuff. Slavery would definitely come back. Like all this sort of stuff, just I think is like inevitable, particularly if there's a huge city.
But this is the thing. I think only, like, I think the walls encompass like I say, the size of a small province. I think the city is a part of it, and I think that parts of the city are overrun by different factions and also abominations. Like, I don't think this is a safe place. It's not a secure place to be.
you described it as a mega dungeon. Is it subterranean?
I think parts of it are subterranean. I think parts of it are in the fortress. I think parts of it are in ruins. Like I think the whole thing. Yeah, the whole province is essentially a mega dungeon. So, like, obviously, there's going to be bits where you're outdoors. Like,
what if there was like? Sorry, I'm going to change subject, but I'm just thinking of like ways that you could prove it. What if there was like, so Zoroastrianism has this like eternal fire that's been burning for like 700 years, in a temple, for example. So what if there was like a fire that had been burning all the time that there was a god, and there were like Vestal virgins, like in Rome, all these like things that are like there are gods, and then like suddenly the fire went out, all the virgins like aged 600 years or something and like shriveled to dust. Like all these things just happened, which like always were traditionally like there is a god and here is the proof. You know, this fire that one day they just all the things stopped. You know,
that's actually genius, because then it could be something that's so big, like take the idea of the fire. It might not be that, but like it would be unavoidable. You couldn't not say, "Oh no, that doesn't mean anything." Like,
yeah, and there might be 3 or 4 or 5 different things that everyone somewhere has seen or heard one of these happening. It would be inescapable.
And when it happened, like meteors could have rained down and stuff. Like all sorts of shit could have happened that like sort of tick people off to the prospect that they're not around anymore. Yeah, I like that. Like a symbol that was there.
Constellations disappear. Like that's something that happens in a couple different books, that like stars start to disappear, and it's a big deal.
Yeah, like Dragonlance, when you see a star go out, you know that god is now walking on the earth. Like that's when you knew it had got to take a human form, because their star would disappear, and you're like, oh shit, they're on fucking Earth, man. So yeah, I really like that. That's a really smart way of doing it, and then it would be irrefutable.
Or like all the priests have something. They all have like a halo or something, you know, something. And then like one day all the halos go away and they all just like bleed from their eyes or something, you know, like some idiot this comes upon like every priest. So like everywhere, and if it's like medieval Europe, there's a priest everywhere, in every village, in every town. That'd be pretty irrefutable, I think. Like, oh god, all the priests are dead. What happened?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, all right. So along with this mega city, then I've gone through that. Like basically, essentially, like I imagine GODGRAVE itself to be like a Dark Souls-esque kind of place where, you know, there's many different layers and there's all sorts of different biomes within a very small portion of the world. Different factions rule different parts of it. And there's also terrifying monsters that I'm gonna be inspired by a few of the D&D monsters, but there aren't going to be orcs, for example. I should have stated at the top of this. This is a human setting. There aren't going to be elves. There aren't going to be dwarves or anything like that. Just humans. But there aren't going to be dragons. I reckon there aren't going to be some maybe Lovecraftian kind of things, but I think that gets quite leaned on quite heavily. I think just some. If you could say to me, is this in it or not, I could probably tell you, but off the top of my head, I don't know. Beholders, yeah. Say that again.
Vampires.
Yes, but not like nice Dracula vampires, more like terrifying.
Nice Dracula
Witcher vampires.
Like what vampires, sorry?
Like Witcher vampires, which are like giant bats, sort of.
Yes.
Yeah, they're scary.
Yes.
Yeah, some of the things you've described have evoked a little of that Witcher feel of things.
Yeah, I guess
way.
it's kind of bleak Scandinavian kind of element to it, I suppose, but that's also, I don't know, kind of. Is it because it's just humans?
Yeah,
Right,
like but
dwarves
just
are in-
the
and elves are in
humans and
witches.
like maybe there's more monsters and stuff now, and a little bit of high fantasy and some magic thrown in. It's a good thing.
That's good. That is good. The last thing I'm going to do.
Question.
Go on.
What was the role of people with divine magic in society before all this, and can they still perform it?
The holy warriors and healers, I think they would have taken the exact position that they would in a D&D setting. I think paladins would be warriors that wield their power in the name of their lord and saviors or whatever to smite their enemies. I think clerics would be exactly the same, to heal and to protect those who worship that power. I think they would be exactly the same.
Caius is voting that you disempower clerics and paladins and play in the crazy 1 year right after it's all happened, because he thinks that would be the most fun and the most interesting.
It would be very interesting.
Yep. I don't know where else clerics are getting their power from, and paladins, unless it's like from the shadow or something. Like,
well, that was the concept I came up with, was the well, which was the finite blessing that was left on the land as the gods were leaving, so they can use it, but it is at a cost to their own sanity.
But
So
okay, so
go ahead.
If the gods left and like planned it, it's not as cataclysmic. So if they like set up this well thing and we're going somewhere, then there's time for people to be like, what's the well? What's going on? And if there are clerics in a D&D sense, they can also like commune with the gods, like speak directly to them. You know, so it implies that the gods like left on purpose as opposed to something cataclysmic happened.
I had the same kind of thought as well, where I think that well might be something that had been set up for a very long time, and it was only used in very special cases because it wasn't as effective. So like maybe if you still have paladins or clerics, they're nerfed. Like if they're going to have to use this thing, but if I like what Lloyd is pointing out, that if they've planned this and they've been able to leave this behind, it's not quite as jarring.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I hadn't thought of that, and I think you're right. In terms of the tone of the setting, it isn't quite as devastating but there's one last thing left. I don't know, the way I looked at it originally was like one desperate kind of mark left on the world was as they were being dragged away or destroyed or whatever happened to them, the last element of their power was left for them to use. Maybe then, I don't know, is it better if they don't have that power at all?
Jeff called it a contingency plan in the chat. It says like maybe they had this set up 100, 200, however long a year goes, as long as living memory, there's always been this well that if something went wrong, the clerics or the priests would still have their power.
Maybe there was always a well and the gods used to just refill it. Every month there'd be like a festival and people would like, I don't know, do something, whatever, some religious thing, and then it would be refilled, and now it can't be refilled anymore.
They refill it every 100 years, and you're coming up on that 100 mark.
Yes, There we go. That's actually a really good idea. I hadn't thought of it actually being there beforehand. I mean, I didn't really kind of think of it as an actual physical well, like that holds divine power. Like I imagined that it's just in wherever you get the divine energy is kept in a divine power station or something. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh, it doesn't have to be like a real well, but
yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you. I really like that idea, but I don't. Again, is that still too much hope?
not if they're about to run out.
I like it that they have no power, that it's just gone. And you can't play a cleric, or you can, but it's just shit. Like you can play cleric, but you're just like a shit fighter. You can play a paladin, but you're just like a worse fighter if you want to. Like the god is not there anymore, so where are they getting it from? So either you play like a paladin of the shadows, where you like are knowingly like taking your power from somewhere in the hopes that you can save the world by doing it.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Or you're just like, well, I mean, God's dead, so I can't be a cleric.
I just really like the. I mean, this is why I came up with the idea of the second sight, because there are people that can like see these marks left from where the gods had been there. So it's not like they can see power that still exists, like, but they can. I don't know. Maybe the idea of that what we were saying before about finding them again in itself becomes a faith. But again, I don't know if that undoes the whole thing. Does that undo the whole thing if they can still have power when the source of their power is gone?
Like what? Like it wouldn't if they still have the power. It's so easy for them to still be like, God's still here. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, yeah, you're right.
Because if you're a priest and you like the proof of God's existence is you occasionally going, I heal you for 2d8 hit points or something, right? Which is a miracle. And you can still do that. Then there's just like it's so easy for you to just be like, everything's fine. Don't worry about it. I still have my powers. God is still with us, and I don't see anything really changing. Even if there is a cataclysm and everyone's like, "Oh, God's dead," they're like, "Don't worry about it. I can still do my magic. It's fine. He's still here."
All right. We have Jeff Doty also on the no power train. He's big on that. And Drop Dice says you can get power from oaths if you're a paladin. So it might be interesting to see that come to the forefront for paladins who don't have any divine magic anymore, but are having to find other ways to do things.
It's kind of like I had said about weaponized faith. That's the case in the Warhammer universes. Is that like faith itself can be like manifested into like, even though there's not like a specific god, well, there are in Warhammer Fantasy, but like they don't really give the power. It comes from the person whose faith is so strong that they can do miracles.
Right, but that's what I was saying before about them, like their will to find them again is the thing that gives them that faith. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's tricky because I do think, like I said,
I agree with you.
if you do that, then like they can just be like, don't worry, everything's fine. God is fine. Everything's fine. Everything's the same. It works better as well to think like if the reason that like the like paladins are very, very powerful and clerics are very, very powerful in the world, especially if magic is outlawed, and then all of a sudden those people don't have their powers anymore, and so you just get like dickheads with swords cutting down temples and smashing in doors and like dominating through just warcraft.
Which will buy into this particular faction idea that I've got. I mean, do we have? Because let me tell you about this before we move on, because I very aware we've been on this for a very long time. So this is an idea that I've had for a faction, and I think it kind of buys into what would happen. The types of individuals that would rise to power, as Lloyd quite rightly says, are people that would be very good at warfare and have a... Well, I'll just read this and you tell me what you think. So this faction idea is, they're known as Immortal Mass. Okay? So while there are traditions and factions from those formerly of high status and high stock, the Immortal Mass were born from revolutionary stock. When the revelation dawned, a movement of exiles and malcontents moved against the established powers of the land. Their words, "We remain," speaks of a movement militantly proud and certain that if mankind outlasted the gods, it can weather anything. So essentially, these motherfuckers show up and are like, we're like, they're basically pro-human. They're like, we don't need them anymore, and we're still here, so we're gonna do whatever the hell we like. Which in a way is admirable, but it's also them seizing power and doing whatever they want. And I imagine them to be quite threatening, but also quite relatable as well. Any thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
no gods, no masters.
Mm.
Yep, that'd be me. That's what I'll play.
This would be.
Caius has an interesting question. If necromancers can bring back humans to some sort of unlife, could they bring a god back to some sort of unlife? And what would a zombie or revenant god be like?
Yeah, Caius, I'm stealing that. That's going to happen.
That could be a faction.
Yeah.
The Society of the Resurrected God.
That is so rad.
And there could obviously be like actual religious people who are like, don't do that. God, please don't do that. It's so scary.
They would be. That would be absolutely terrifying. That is a terrifying thought.
So scary.
That Caius, I'm gonna have to get in touch with you so you can have like 10% of the no money I make from this, because I'm using that. That is incredible. That's a great idea.
And Jeremy from Erasmus Expeditions says, what if other lesser people have suddenly now found divine favor? No one knows where it comes from.
Well, this was an idea I had because there's a class that has been reintroduced quite recently into 5e called the Favored Soul, which essentially uses divine power but uses the mechanics of a sorcerer. So they don't pick their spells every day; they just have these gifts for some reason. And it is something that I looked at and thought, well, maybe if we don't have clerics, we might have Favored Souls. They're in Unearthed Arcana. You can find them on the Wizards of the Coast website, and there's thing that I have in my document actually. So it is something that I had considered, and I do kind of like it, but at the same time, the same thing that Lloyd was saying before, like, is that too much hope? Is that too much? Is that too much of a show of divine power that could convince people that they're still there? You know what I mean?
Another question you have to ask yourself mechanically is, do you want divine healing magic in your game?
Exactly.
So I think the Favorite Soul also gets some healing.
Yes.
So like just the question of like, if you want healing magic in your game and how drastically that changes the game from if you don't have it, is a question worth asking. Just like mechanically, if you want it to be about suffering and like lethality, then including healing magic is a really good way to like lower the lethality and like lessen the impact of getting stabbed.
That's very true. That is very true. The thing is, I'm stuck. I'm kind of caught between two places right now because I have the image of my mind of these lost individuals that have, they're like a bit of a light in the darkness, as it were, even though the darkness is insurmountable and they'll probably fail. They're like a flickering candle. They're like the last remnant of what is left of this power. And I kind of like the idea of that, but you're also very right, Lloyd, that if there is divine power, then it's going to be, you're not going to die as easily. And that's another thing that I want in this game is lethality. I want it to be brutal. And I mean...
And that might be something to playtest. Like, playtest a few things that have a paladin. And then...
So the difference is very clearly, like when I play Marius, who has healing magic, I can run into any encounter without any fear of death because I can like run in there, and even if I get smashed down to like 1 hit point, as long as I don't die in 1 hit, I will be able to spend some time healing myself and be fine again. The difference is in Iscloft, I would never really consider doing that. I would always be extremely careful, unless I'm playing like a maniac, in the way that I go about things. I will always try and avoid a fight if possible because I know that I could just die. Yeah. So it's a question of like what the game feels like, because including healing magic immediately makes the game more heroic because you can take those crazy risks. You can like run into fight a monster one-on-one, because you've got a guy behind you who's like, yeah, you're fine.
You're right.
On the subject of feel and tone, there was a question earlier from Forbidden Lore. He asks, the pillars make the setting sound like the Witch movie. I don't know how you say it. But Godgrave sounds like the Mordheim miniatures game revolving around a cursed city and raiding it. How do these things fit together? Is the Witch aesthetic what will be applied to a game that's about traipsing around a mega dungeon?
I mean, I meant when I meant about the Witch is that I like the tone of the Witch. I like the fact that when you're witnessing what's happening in that film, you are, like Lloyd was saying, like you're always a little bit off on the back foot. You fully understand what's happening with this weird magic going on. That was definitely the vibe I want from the magic in this game. I want it to be really confusing and really unnerving. In terms of more time, I am slightly familiar with it. I've never played it before, but I have friends who have and have enjoyed it immensely. I like the idea of Godgrave and this huge city sort of being the central part of the world. I don't think that every game would happen in the city. I think there's places outside of it. I've been having a go drawing some maps to sort of get my sort of head around what the rough area of the world looks like, at least the first part.
On the maps thing, there's been a question about how big a province you mean, because that means different things, different places.
I know it does, and I was trying to get away with it, Taylor, because I haven't exactly decided how big that province is going to be.
I mean, the provinces of Canada are like 100 times bigger than Ireland.
Exactly. Exactly. It was basically a way of me to describe it without actually having to be too definitive about it too much. That's why I've been like about how many years has it been since this happened, and it's the same with the size of it. Okay, let's.
You said you go. Sorry.
No, you can't. Go on. It buys me time.
You said Mega Dungeon earlier, but I just didn't at all expect this to be a Mega Dungeon game. I actually don't necessarily know that it is day to day. I think like putting words in your mouth here, but yeah, I think it's like there could be a Mega Dungeon underneath the city, but day to day is not going to be a dungeon crawler, right? It's going to be
no. So what I mean by, because there are a lot of mega dungeons where there are civilizations that exist within them. That's the way I look at it. Anyway, this thing is massive. Okay, so there is the upper city where there are still people that sort of have a really unsteady existence. There are cities outside of Godgrave that function more like cities in a fantasy setting. But if you go in there, it's like, it's going to be, I reckon it's kind of like a push for ground for different factions and stuff like that to try and gain control of different parts of it. You know what I mean?
I mean, the great part of having a huge city is that I can run a gang game, which I love.
Yep.
I think that, there's cool stuff to be done there. And I do like because it's like this huge thing, and I imagine it's been there forever. You'll have different levels of the city and stuff. You go down one level and it's like, that's where all the fucking shitty people live. The people who make leather because it smells of piss. The people who butchers and all those people who do traditionally low jobs, and then beneath that you probably have mines and things like that. And beneath that you just have the dregs and mutants and stuff like that. And it keeps going down, I guess.
And I like the idea that if you follow the wall, because I imagine this huge circular wall that basically cordons the whole thing off. If you follow that wall for 14 miles, there's a tower that is haunted or something that no one goes into anymore. That part of the city is lost. Okay, there's another part of the city where there's a demonic dragon, or whatever. If you go in here, there's or like you say, a race of mutants or whatever, humanoids that are basically just descended into anarchy and chaos and dire, situations.
The haunted thing reminds me, Jeff said earlier that if people die and maybe their spirits can't go places, maybe now you've got wraiths and ghosts and all these other things from restless souls that might start being a real problem.
Yeah, this is what I'm trying to get across. The balance is off. So there are horrendous things that live next door to you. Maybe not next door to you, but you know what I mean? If you're in part of the city, I reckon if you weren't at one of the tallest towers, there would be someone up there who is have made a life for themselves completely unconnected to people that live in a different part of the city because, I don't know. Or is it too much? Is it too mad?
I think like I like the idea that it was once this like massive city, but like as the years have gone on, and especially recently, now that like there's no more divine magic and no more order, the city has like shrunk, and so like the outer parts of it have just been like left to ghouls and whatever weirdness has appeared, or like whole sections of it, like once the rich part of town,
Mm.
is now been abandoned, and like we just like shut all those gates and like sealed up the walls and stuff so that nothing can get out, nothing can get in. But it's a good place then for like adventurers to be like, oh, we can go into the old rich quarter and like try and steal things, and
Yeah. Like my first, I don't know if this is saying too much. I was gonna, because at some point I am gonna run this, and I think I will just do a one shot. I think the first game that I run is going to be called The Wizard, and it's literally going to be about nobodies being told to go into a tower that's sort of part of the rundown part of the city, or maybe on the outskirts or in the wilderness, and they've got to go into this tower and they've got to face a wizard. Essentially, like that's the game, and it will be about the journey to the tower and them exploring different elements of the world, and then being confronted by a power that's now in the place of, where the gods once were. Now there's magic and all sorts of horrors and stuff like that. So yeah, that's exactly the kind of game that I'd like to run in it. So we have been talking about that for a long time. And I very much appreciate the feedback. This is why I wanted to have this conversation, because I knew there's going to be stuff that would get past me, and there was. And now I can listen back to this and try and fix some of those problems, have a bit of a more think about what happened with the gods. I reckon is a very important thing. But I will be, I'll be updating my progress on this, and we'll obviously. I'll do more videos, I guess. Were there any more questions about this before we move on? I think we're good with that, aren't
we? Probably loads in the chat. It's very active today.
It is. We've got a lot of people.
Well, I don't see any that are marked with questions, so that's going to be my way out.
Yes, agreed. I will, however, go back through the chat later on, and I'll see if I can apply any of those things that you've been typing to my thoughts.
Now there are Facebook questions.
There are Facebook questions, so let's get to those then.
I've got one here from Michael Sham. It says, when building your world's history, how much depth do you lend? Is it intricate, simple, or do you prefer a young world?
I've been talking for ages, Lloyd.
It's tricky because with Iscloft, the history was played. So, but day to day, nobody knows. So I guess simple would be my answer. You don't need to go into huge detail because no one needs to know that stuff until they need to know it. And like a very quick way, I think, to turn people off your setting is to be like, here are 17 pages that you have to read through if you want to play in the game. For me, I'm lazy and I want to just like play. I want to do like 20 minutes of research at most.
And that includes making your character.
Yeah, exactly. Like I really don't want to do a lot of work to start playing, so I would prefer if it was simple, and I also think it's easier for you then to go back and change things to make it fit.
I think it's an enviable state of affairs when you've been playing a game so long that what you've played is the historical sort of thing. I had that with my old D&D setting main realm, but even that wasn't like, it all happened in different places. So like, there was like strands of history here and there. Whereas with Iscloft, and it's something that I've always really loved about it, was hearing the stories about Gunnar Gunnarsson, because Gunnar Gunnarsson was a character, that had been played by you, wasn't it, Lloyd?
Yep.
So I think that's like I say, an enviable state of affairs, because you're then very aware of what happened because you remember the last game you played. I really like that idea. So I think probably keep it to the minimum. I know I'm saying that, although I've just gone on this spiel about all this stuff that's happened in my setting, but I think the key is to keep it simple. And that's what I'm really trying to do. I'm really trying to force myself to be as simple about making this world as possible. I don't want that much detail. Like, I was hesitant to say what the gods are. I was hesitant to say what happened to them,
Yeah, I think that's good practice. I think like the more that you lay down definitively, the less you can change as you go,
Yeah.
And if it's very, I think people, I don't fall into it because I'm lazy, but lots of people fall into the trap of like getting so detailed in their setting history and like, here are the people who lived in this part of the city, and here's their family tree, and here's all their names, and like nobody gives a shit. Like nobody cares, Like maybe for Westeros they do,
Yeah, I've been reading
But
Fire and
like,
Blood. It's really good.
yeah, I think for most, like nobody is going to go through the process except for maybe Nico of like reading all the Isklov stuff, But there isn't even that much of it, and that's like good that way, I think, because then you can like add and change things as you go.
What do you think about it, Taylor?
I'm running into the same thing as well right now of how much do you kind of plan out before you really get into running games, and how much do you have to have set before you give information to play, and how much do you make up? And, I am definitely leaning towards simpler is better, because it's so much less for me to remember. Go, oh, did I tell this group that? Does that mesh with what I am running for this other group? And I think it would be better for me the less convoluted it is. So I like young worlds, or kind of like Isklov is. It's more of an oral history, and it's not necessarily all true or all right. And there's just like stories that are more tradition than fact.
It's why human-only worlds are really good, because humans die really quickly. If you have elves who live for 5,000 years, it's really hard for you to like not decide what happened 5,000 years ago, because they were there and they remember and they're still here. So if you have human-only worlds, humans are frail things who die in less than 100 years, and so in 100 years, history from 100 years ago is already myth.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and a very important point to make. Yeah, and I'm kind of liking the idea because I've never done a human-only setting before. It's definitely Lloyd's influence, but also, again, it's simple. I don't have to worry about, where do the elves fit into this? Oh, and where do the dwarves fit into this? No, they're just humans. It's just humanity. I don't have to worry about people choosing, I want to be a dragonborn. Well, the dragonborn don't really exist in this part of the world. No, I don't have to say that. You're just humans. And it's very liberating.
The other thing that I really like about human-only settings is that like you do it based on culture rather than on race, and that like allows you to like logically, like through logical increments, decide who is where and why. So there is a culture in GODGRAVE, let's say, what were they called? The We Remain, those guys. That's a culture, right?
The immortal mass.
Yes, so that's a culture. You are one of these people. You are from this place. You believe in these things. Therefore, you have the following like mechanical benefits. But also, mostly, you have this like culture that is inherent to you. And you might also be like you're from the section of town where they make all the gross stuff underneath. You're like one of the tradesmen or whatever, and that changes your opinion in this way or whatever. I think that's like really useful for world building too.
For sure.
On world building, a question from Jeff Doty from on the Facebook is, when you're world building, do you find it more useful to focus on the exceptional things, adventurers and monsters, big wars, magic, rare artifacts, kingdoms and gods, or the mundane things like what people eat and clothing and art and traditions and cultural things and behavior? And which one makes your world more memorable and vivid? Ideally, you do both, but if you had time to pick and you just had to do one, which would it be?
I saw you were about to speak.
Yeah, so you're about to. So you.
All right, I'll say very quickly this. That I mean, I'm sure we'll all be in agreement that you don't have the extraordinary without the mundane. You aren't a special hero if everyone is a special hero. So I think if you're going to have that sort of figure in your game, you need both anyway. But for me personally, I've got to be honest, like I always think big picture. I always think of sweeping epic storytelling, and I think of rad battles and monsters and powers that people have, and swords with glorious names and the like. So I know I very much fall into, when I'm thinking about what I want in my game, that's the first thing I think about for sure. When it comes to the mundane, I think I wouldn't say that's a blind spot of mine, but it's something that I don't go into as much. I don't know.
I think you need, like, if you're making a setting, starting it, you have to start with the big stuff. I think like it's insane to start with what food people eat, because you need to know the big stuff before. But I do think like really a setting only becomes a setting when it's got the little stuff. Traditions and culture and stuff like that, that's really when it starts to feel like a place, as opposed to a history book. Because there's only so many like heroes, and like players are like, which battle was that again? What happened with the thing over there? I've gone robot-y, have I? I just see the two going.
You're back
Small
now.
stuff is important. Small stuff is important, I think. The traditions and the culture is like really the backbone of a setting.
Yeah. So if you only had to pick one, would you pick to focus on the adventures and the gods and the wars and the big exceptional things, or would you focus on the more mundane things?
I think you have to pick the big stuff first if you want to write a setting.
Mm.
But I think they are equally important. You have to start with one, though, you know.
Yeah, I think so. I don't have much more to say to that.
That's it. Yep. You go.
I was just going to say, the second question from Jeff is that he has trouble deciding to world build without very specific inspiration. Ideas rarely feel like a conscious choice, merely something that appear to either feel right to include or not. What comes first for you, typically speaking? The desire to create a setting or an idea for a setting? Are your details consciously decided upon and created, or do they strike you out of nowhere and feel right or wrong?
Let me tell you something, and this is something that you might actually remember, Jeff, because it's something I put into our group chat. But I actively tried to make a setting. It was because I wanted something new, but I couldn't really think of what that new thing was. And I tried to make a setting. I actually sat down and I thought, what could it be? And it was sort of like an Arthurian kind of thing, heraldry, things like that. And it fell flat on its face because it was me trying too hard to conjure something into my head. That's essentially, but that, that's just the way I work. Though I work better when something jumps out at me. GODGRAVE, me, jumped out immediately, and it was almost like when I thought. In fact, the first thing I thought of was the memory saint of the second sight. It was just that was the term of a character. That was the thing that started. I was like, why a memory saint? I thought, well, memory saints because they're remembering something that was lost. And I thought, oh, what were they remembering? The gods. Obviously, they remember the gods. The gods are lost. Oh my god! And then it just went, and I just realized this is it. This is what I've been waiting for. So I opened up my laptop and I started writing. And I spent about 2 nights just writing down some ideas and evicting others. Like initially I thought, oh, elves and dwarves, and I thought, actually no, fuck it, get rid of them. So does that answer his question? That's how I work anyway. And me trying too hard didn't work. It just had to happen, and it happened. I'm not saying that it's like 100% original ideas. Like obviously there are some things that are stolen, like I mentioned before. It's influenced by other things, but I think it has enough of my stamp on it for it to be mine as well. And I think I feel confident going forward with this game now. I feel like I could run this game pretty much right now. with a few little tweaks here and there. You guys?
I don't think I've ever sat down. Actually, no, I did. I very rarely sit down to make a setting. I did it with Jade Horde, where we talked about orcs and we were going to make them cool again. So then I sat down and wrote that setting in like an evening, I guess. Generally, I have to have an idea for a setting. But I've only done it once, really. I've just worked on that one forever. I don't know, like I don't do a lot of like setting building often. I'd rather like work on one and make it, deep and like satisfying, as opposed to like flip from one to the other. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just the way that I've never really like been much for world building. Which might sound crazy because of the book or whatever, but like I don't really do a lot of sitting down and like thinking about it.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Like you don't. It's not something that you. Well, I don't find I do often either. I have Main Realm, which is my old one from that was when we were playing 3.5. So that tells you how long ago that was. And then there's Nine Kingdoms, which was born out of me wanting to run a campaign in 5e, and that was the idea I stumbled upon. So this would be my third out of however many years I've been playing D&D, and that's a long time.
Like I guess like I can if I wanted to do it, I would just like sit down and think of, because we had a brief conversation over voice message and then we had a setting at the end of it. Like it doesn't take a lot of work, I don't think, at all to make a setting. It's easy.
Yeah.
Just like think of like one thing that like defines it. It's the Stone Age, okay, and then just like go from there. Come up with some pillars and go from there. I don't think it's.
I forgot about Stone.
I don't think it's like that much. I think like, but I have to be in the mood and I have to like want to do it. I don't really ever.
I think the second part of that question is when you're putting things in, do you think, yeah, I want this in there? Or do you think of an idea and go, yes, that fits, or no, it doesn't?
Yeah.
It depends.
Yeah.
It's been a whole episode.
Oh
Yeah,
my
we
gosh.
nearly got through a whole episode without saying it, but it does depend for me. Like sometimes if I'm running, like for example, when we were coming with Star Metal, we had a few ideas that we wanted in there, and so we just like put them in there, just forced them in.
Yeah.
But mostly I think like with Jade Horde, I was like, I want orcs to be cool. That was the idea of the whole setting. I was like, okay, I'll just go from there.
Yeah, and it was a conversation, and then that was it, wasn't it? Like for instance, I knew that even though there weren't going to be fantasy races, I knew there weren't going to be like monstrous humanoid races like orcs, for example. In this, like I knew instantly that they're not going to be in it. Like I knew that. What else? I'm talking about GODGRAVE here. Like I said, if you were to say to me, "Is this in it or is this not in it?" I could probably tell you yes or no straight away.
Yeah, but that's more of a gut feeling than anything.
But that's it. That's all it ever is to me. I think it's entirely instinct. Because to me, a particular monster or a particular weapon or power evokes a certain something. Like I don't know how to best describe it. I think this is going to sound so pretentious. Every setting has a voice, and you've got to... No, it's yeah.
That's true though. Like you can just know if you have come up with an idea for what the setting is, you just know what goes in and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I saw at one point, I saw this crazy picture of this. It's like a building. I think it's in Singapore. And they've planted all these vines around it, and it's grown up, and the whole top is some sort of a like garden terrarium, and it looks like a giant tree, but it's this very high-tech building. And I had this brief moment of, ooh, it would be super cool if Second World was secretly like super high-tech but all nature integrated. And I played around with it for like 2 days and was like, nah, it doesn't fit. It's just like at times I think you have those ideas and you go, could that fit? Would it work? And then you just decide yes or no whether, and it's for me it's a gut feel.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it.
So it depends.
So it depends. We do have other questions in the YouTube now as well, but I don't
we
know,
also
how long
have
have we been
Caius's
going?
Corner.
Oh, we do have to do Caius's Corner. Yeah,
We got to do Caius's Corner.
That's the law.
There's a lot. Have you got it? I'll find it.
Yes,
Okay.
I got it.
Wait.
So
Caius's Corner. It needs work.
yeah, a little bit. So Caius says, how much does vocabulary matter in the world? Does it make any difference if Roman PCs say short sword and chainmail instead of gladius and lorica hamada, since they have the same effect? Should swearing be with words that impact us or words that impacted another culture, even if the words seem tame? How much of a learning curve do you want for players in your world? Do you want it to appeal to the masses or to a hardcore niche?
He's very fucking good at the questions, Caius, isn't he?
Oh, so good. We've talked about this before in regards to Middle Earth. An awful lot of what makes Lloyd's Against the Shadow really great is that everyone has a shared vernacular and a shared vocabulary and a method of speaking that is like Lord of the Rings. Essentially, it's faithful to Lord of the Rings, and this is something that I thought of for my setting. Like when I've written it, I've written whatever is said by Evictor Nile, this character that I came up with, in a certain way. And there's lots of vowels and sort of medieval-esque language.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think it's like really one of the most important bits of running getting. It's like one of the things that made the Roman game so good is that we, like Kaya said, we always said gladius, we always said lorica. No, I'm gone there, am I? Yeah,
No, you're there.
You're back.
Like we always in that Roman game always said the Latin, you know. I even swore like Romans a lot. And like you said, in Middle Earth, it's really important, and Isklov now as well. There's lots of sort of, I'm trying to do more and more sort of Viking Age speech and swearing. There's lots of like things that happen in Isklov that I think it's really important. Basically, long and short of it, I think like it's the best way to evoke a setting.
And I think it's a way to take your setting from being like every other fantasy setting out there into being something that is more unique and that calls back to like L5R when we played that game. Like we were all very particular about referring to the weapons correctly as correctly as we could. Matt did a great job of referring to the little low tables by the right names, and it makes a difference. I think you're right, Lloyd. It is really important, but it can be easily overlooked.
I think it can, yeah. Again, you're absolutely right. You could be playing in the most basic, generic fantasy game ever, but if you had like Firefly, when they swear, they use Chinese, don't they? Because that is where the language went when Earth was at that stage in Firefly. So yeah, I think you've nailed it on the head, and I think that is a really good place to end because Taylor has to go and eat some dinner. This went on for quite some time. I'm not sure how long, but it's felt like a while, but I hope it's been okay. I really enjoyed that, and I'd like to thank both of you for your honest and incredibly useful feedback. And for those of you watching, thank you ever so much. If you're watching live, and thanks for watching after the fact. And how do I end this usually? How do we end this?
We just say bye until the hangout stops.
We say bye until the hangout stops. So what I'm going to do, ladies and gentlemen, orcs and goblins, is just going to press